This is Beau's workshop. Today we're building a Rail Bird Poling Skiff. The poling skiff is modeled after a Chesapeake Bay push boat. This is designed by Jeff Spira of Spira International. Jeff creates blueprints for wood and fiberglass boats for the home builder, and it ranges from stand-up paddle boards to cruisers, whatever you're into. I did one other project called the Booth Bay Mini Dory. The project went so well and was so fun, I just had to get into a little more trouble. So we decided to build a Railbird. Let's get to it. This is a strongback. This is the platform that I'll build the Railbird from. As you can see, I used a 16-foot 2x6 with 2x4 uprights. I added some gussets. The last project I did, the strongback got a little flimsy toward the end of the project. The dust that you generate from sanding is quite tremendous. So I added some casters on this strongback so I could roll it out of the garage and make most of the mess outside. So I started out the project. I laid out all the angles for the frames. I did this on a piece of scrap plywood that I had from another project. This will allow me to get the angles right, and I double checked and laid this out with a square and took very precise measurements. And if I make mistakes now, it'll be a bigger problem later, so I'm really taking my time to get a good start. And also on the strongback, I've laid out the measurements where I need to attach the frames of the boat. The next step will be to start to construct the frames, and then I'll space up the frames off of the top surface of the strongback. That's based on certain measurements on the blueprints that you can get from Jeff Spira, and this boat will start going together rather quickly. I'm constructing frame 2. I'm going to work my way from the outside in case I get glue everywhere. It won't mess up the work surface that I'm on. And I did a dry fit where I laid it out. I ran some screws into it lightly to help everything line up. When you put the glue on it, it tends to be a little on the slippery side. But now that I have the dry fit, I dampen the surface a little bit as the directions on the glue. Put a little bit of glue on each side of the frame where I'm making my joint. And this glue will expand and foam up. You want to put enough on there to get the job done, but if you put too much, it's just going to make a huge mess. So now that I have that fitted up, we're just going to line up the holes. And the screws will act as my clamp. It helps if your drill is fully charged. Alright, clamp down in 24 hours, it'll be as strong as it's going to be. I've constructed all of the frames and I've attached them to the strongback. You can see the upright blocks. That's the space the frames off of the top surface of the strongback. That's laid out in the blueprints. I've mounted the stem in the front. I used some 3/8 plywood and some scrap wood to get the stem nice and centered. I cut some chunks off of that 2x6 support to allow the chine log to attach in to the keel here. I cut notches in the bottom of the frames for the keelson. I've laid out the cuts for the chine logs. When you're constructing the frames, you can set the screws in a way that you don't have to remove them before you cut the chine logs. The glue will hold everything together. If you accidentally put a screw in the wrong spot, well, you can take it out to notch it out. This is the stern. I have the transom mounted at the proper angle. I pre-notched all of these before I set it in to make it easier. For the keelson, I bought a 2x4, not a 2x4, but a 1x4, and I'm going to cut it with the table saw down the 3 inches that it calls for. I didn't feel like splicing that. Well, the shear clamp and the chine log's installed. You can see, cut these joints, got all set back. There's 2 tools I bought for this project that I didn't have on the first one. I bought a plane and this Japanese style pull saw. And when you're trying to make these joints, you can lightly clamp the pieces of wood together, and you can come in with this saw and you can really clean that up nice. So this is what this all ends up looking like. And here, get these joints all nice and tight and glued and put a screw in it, and then you're all set. Once you get that, you just set a piece of plywood up on the side, do a rough tracing, and you pull that out and you cut out the rough cut, and I screw it on there, and then I take the rough edges and I use a belt sander and I clean everything up to get a nice surface. I've made some pretty good progress since the last clip, and I got a little ahead of myself and I forgot to film laying the fiberglass. But I did 2 layers of 6-ounce fiberglass cloth. After wetting down the wood with the epoxy, I stretched the fiberglass over it, worked out all the ripples, and ended up soaking it down to make sure I had good penetration with the epoxy, and it came out pretty nice. So now I have flipped the boat over. I'm starting to clean up the frames. I'm adding a few pieces into the floor. I'm going to put a deck in this. The blueprints call for 3/8 plywood on the bottom, although on the supply list it said 4 sheets of 1/4. And I decided that I wanted to put a deck in this boat, so I ended up going with 1/4 inch sandy ply. I'm adding a few frames, and I'm going to deck the whole thing with 1x material. And I think that's going to be a real nice product. I'm really wanting to celebrate the wood. I'm not going to paint this one. Kind of see, got a little sanding got away from me there a little bit. But it has a nice little wood grain pattern that you can see through the fiberglass. I also have a decorative piece I'm going to put here in the front. I'm about to epoxy that on, and that'll match my paddle. I'm making a stand-up paddleboard style paddle that's laminated with a couple different types of wood. I'll also make a push pole, and I'll probably also get a trolling motor for this rig. I hope to do some serious fishing. I've decided to put a wood deck. I really wanted to celebrate the wood in this project. Before I put the deck down, I painted the bottom red. I used some car primer and I used some enamel paint to really make sure that everything was sealed up well. This is 1x material, and when I mocked it up it was a bit heavy, so I took the table saw and I thinned up all the 1x3s, 1x4, 1x2s, and I made them 9/16 inch thick. I added a couple support frames between the frames of the boat, so there's only about 19 inches span, so it'd be a lot like a pallet. Now the weight's much more manageable. Well, we're coming up on the moment of truth. There's a few little touch-up areas to do on the finish, but essentially this is finished. I got a little stand-up paddleboard paddle to test it with. I'll put a trolling motor on it when I get out in the salt water. This lake that I'm in is pretty deep, so poling it around is not going to work for here, but I'll build a pole so I can creep up on the fish in the salt flats there. This is the launch of the Railbird. So this is the Railbird moving under trolling motor power. Very nice little ride. Still stable. Have the trolling motor, the battery, my son, myself. So we're looking at probably 350 pounds of cargo. And it's doing just fine. I really love this little boat. It's very versatile. Had to do a little modification in the back so that I can adjust the trolling motor while I'm still in it. But the weight capacity, and I'm a pretty big guy. So I got a little reserve buoyancy for the husky gentleman. Turn this down a little bit, it gets super quiet. Just creep right up on those redfish. I'm going to take a moment and just review this build. The Railbird is awesome. I really love this boat. It'll do anything that you want it to do. You can stand up and paddle it. You can stand up and fish. You can sit down and paddle it effortlessly. You can put a trolling motor on it to get you to the fishing hole quicker. I could have a 250-pound man, lead acid battery, trolling motor, and a spare child, and this thing will still perform. You got to get one of these. Thanks for watching this video.